Hi, everyone. This is the first installment of this new series, which I have dubbed Amy's Playlist. And I am looking forward to really digging into a lot of the music that I find on my playlist. As I said, I have chosen Strawberry Fields Forever for the first one, for many reasons. But I expect this series to go on and on and on and on, probably forever, because as long as I am on this journey of discovering new music constantly, of course, there will be more and more music added to my playlist that I like to hear and return to over and over again. So, why have I chosen this song, Strawberry Fields Forever, to be the first one? Well, as I said, there are so many reasons, but I'll share a couple of them. First of all, I am in the middle of this whole Beatles project, and I want to assure you that this Amy's Playlist is not exclusively the Beatles, and I expect to be, over time, to be far more other music than the Beatles eventually. But of course, I'm in the middle of it, and I'm actually in the middle of a particular album, and Strawberry Fields Forever is on this album, but at the same time, it's one of the first songs I listened to. So I've lived with it for quite a while. I set it aside for a while, I've returned to it, and so at the moment, it is really at the top of my playlist. As I get more and more familiar and just enjoy and explore and immerse myself in this, I find myself listening to it quite frequently these days. So, of course, since it's all about my playlist, it makes sense to choose something that is sitting at the top right now as I launch this series. Secondly, why is it at the top? Well, I think you'll find that as I go through what the songs that really attract me and make me return to them, you'll find a lot of common themes, whether it is musical depth and meaning, whether it is color and various tone textures and all of those things, or whether it's melody. Those of you who followed me along this journey know that if there is a good melody, it's hard for me to resist it. So it seems like this song kind of hits all of that and more, which is another reason why I find it at the top these days. So that's just a couple of the big reasons. There are quite a few more, and I'm going to share some of the reasons that I think that I love this piece and find myself growing more and more into it. Now, of course, with a song, a piece of music like Strawberry Fields Forever, not only are there so many things that attract me to it, but it is, whether or not I were attracted to it, there is so much that could be said about it, about why it's an amazing piece of music. I am simply picking a few of the things that are highlights to me right now as it sits at the top of my list over the past few weeks as what I'm going to focus on today. This is not intended to be a full in-depth. In fact, I've already done a sort of in-depth of this piece, touching on certain elements of it quite a while ago. And so this is kind of another return to it, but from a different perspective. Now it's not about, let's tear this piece apart. It's about, why do I find myself drawn to this? And the first thing I want to talk about is that I find that it's such a unique, authentic, and strange combination of contrasting elements. For example, there's this quality of detachment, and at the same time, an incredibly intense feeling of intimacy. And as I think about really detachment and intimacy in the same moment, it's such a contrast and such a dichotomy. Same with, let's say, the feeling of rawness about it. Rawness and even experimentalism, at the same time, incredible sophistication and polish, and a sort of clarity of intent, really well balanced design structure of the piece. That's another one that kind of I sit and I think, as I'm listening to it, I think, this, but this, and this, but this, and it keeps me engaged because I hear both of these at once. And then, of course, there's the orchestration, the instrumentation of it that is so incredibly tonally colorful. There's such a diversity of timbres and textures, even choice of instruments. I could use the word rich, but I almost feel like that's not quite the right choice, simply because rich also carries overtones of, we could say, lush or verdant, or we talk about rich colors, we talk about rich carpet, rich furnishings, this use of the word rich, which doesn't really suit this piece. And at the same time, it is rich, especially tonally. And within this richness, we don't feel the sort of rich furnishings experience. We don't feel a sort of rich carpeting. Instead, we feel that there's this inherent sparseness to it, a spare landscape. And I love that contrast as well. If I start listing all the different sounds and textures and timbres, let's just go through some of the instruments. We have the mellotron opening flute, that distinctive, inescapable, easily identified sound, which kind of is the fingerprint. It's the signature of this piece. And then the percussion. There's Lennon's voice with its own distinct personality. There's the cello, the brass, the guitar, the swarmandel, the backwards cymbal, but backwards. And that also adds its own quality. The piano that shows up later. And then, of course, bongos, timpani, maracas, tambourine, the list goes on. And we go down that list, we think, this sounds like a full orchestral, I don't know, Mahler, Brahms, Wagner, one of those really rich, thick, romantic tradition. And yet, it's not, is it? Did I mention the drums? Let's talk about those for a moment. The more I spend time listening to this, the more I think that also is one of the signatures of this piece. Of course, we have this atmospheric opening with the evocative sonic elements that we get from the mellotron. Everything from, we have this subdued, and I was thinking, how would I describe this? What does that mellotron opening do to me as I listen to it? Because, well, if I play this opening on the harp, you'll notice that it actually has a very elegant, classical feel to it. It feels definitely different on the harp. It sounds like it could come from some Schubertian piano opening. But the mellotron itself adds this specific quality, which I thought of describing it as old lady's house. I don't know if that quite is okay, because I don't want it to sound like I'm saying it in a negative way. Let's think of it more like, perhaps those colorized black and white pictures. There's this feeling of looking at another time, another world from a distance, perhaps going back in our memory to a place that feels so real still, and yet it doesn't exist. And it's when I say old lady's house, let me explain what I meant by that. When I came up with that description, I had this image in my mind, and it came to me so clearly one of the times that I was listening to it recently, that I was standing in some old lady's kitchen, and you could feel the old vinyl on the vinyl flooring, and the faucet at the kitchen sink was old style, old fashioned. And looking out the window, there was this sort of overgrown garden, old, and perhaps a little bit unkempt. But even the scent of a home like that, it gave me this feeling of, oh, wow, this really, really paints a picture like this in my mind. Or I think Vlad is pulling out a picture right now as I'm describing this. He just got this idea. We found this image, Symfonola, which is actually another old instrument, which is kind of obsolete now. But it's this kind of picture, isn't it? This looking through, maybe a little bit blurred, a little bit, what do they call it? Sepia toned. And thank you, Vlad. And so all of that is evoked in the opening mellotron with the quavering flute sound. And going beyond that, there are other things, like when we hear, I believe it's the backward cymbal doing this, starts to sound like a whetstone on a blade.
I mean, it must be high
and
or low.
or a little bit later, footsteps in the wet grass. There are so many things in here sonically that can paint such vivid imagery in our minds, in my mind at least. And at the same time, it's not specific. And so maybe one day I will feel like it's an old lady's house. I'm visiting some old lady's house. Maybe another day I will feel like it's something entirely different. And I love that flexibility of the piece too. The ability to evoke such strong sensations and imagery, and at the same time not lock us into it. And all of this, and then in come the drums, not just coming, they're roaring in. It's almost like Ringo was doing a whole percussion solo by himself, and he just couldn't be reined in. It's like, come on, just back it off. It's so incredibly drums heavy, pounding away, especially as we get towards the last half, and then into the coda. And at that point, it's not just the drums anymore. There's the brass and the piano that are adding do 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 ding ding ding. And rather than the added instruments softening the effect of the percussive effect that the drums give, instead I feel like it intensifies and reinforces that irrepressible spirit that comes tumbling out of the drums. And I love that about it. And so all of that is one, shall I say, lump it all and say one of the reasons that I find myself really enjoying this piece over and over again. Another reason, which is also a rather large lump that I'm going to talk about, is I'm going to say it's the rhythm of the lyrics. But what do I mean by this exactly? Well, in music, and you've heard me talk about this from time to time as I listen to various pieces of music and break them down. In music, we talk about rhythm, like the rhythm we hear in a melody, or the rhythm of a particular instrument. You could easily just use drums as an example. Or the rhythm of, it could be the rhythm of the piano. Or we can talk about harmonic rhythm. Harmonic rhythm is a different type of rhythmic evaluation and assessment. It is evaluating and measuring the pace at which the harmony, the chords, change. Meaning, maybe I have a chord for 10 seconds, and then a different chord for 10 seconds. But then after that, I have a chord every 2 seconds. Okay? It doesn't matter what's happening else around it rhythmically, but that is the harmonic rhythm of the piece. And typically, we expect that rhythm to change from time to time. But that aside, now I'm talking about a different kind of rhythm. The pace of the delivery of the text itself. And perhaps it would make sense to call it maybe oratorical rhythm. Because as I listened to this piece, especially the last couple of days, I suddenly started noticing how the lyrics the delivery of the lyrics are grouped in these little oratorical clusters. And it's such an interesting thing to start to feel that as an element in itself. For example, let me take you down, for I'm going to strawberry fields. You hear how there's a sort of a cluster. Let me take you down, for I'm going to strawberry fields. You hear how there's space between each grouping, but even more than that within the groupings. And I guess I talked to this way back when I did my in-depth examination of it, was the various rhythmic divisions in each melodic phrase, triplets versus duplets, and so on and so forth. But I'm simply going to label that now as rhythmic flexibility, because that's what it gives us the impression of. We don't feel it as triplet, duplet, thislet, thatlet, but more about, let me take you down, for I'm going to strawberry fields. Strawberry fields forever. And you start to feel that, what if this were being delivered as a speech rather than a piece of music? Imagine the power of the pacing of delivery that this would give to a speech like that. And notice also how the melodic grouping of the, let's say the grouping of the melody, the rhythm of the melody, doesn't exactly match with the phrases of the text. Sometimes we're made to wait right in the middle. For I'm going to strawberry fields. As I was thinking about this, I started thinking, this is almost, it's bordering on some of the modern singers that I've listened to who habitually break their phrases right in the middle of a line. Except with someone like, say, Taylor Swift, it comes across as more of a habit or a trope or a stylistic feature, whereas with Lennon here, it's a technique put to specific use. What use is this? For I'm going to... We're made to wait. It's a sort of mystery, and it fits into this whole idea of magical mystery tour that the album encompasses. For I'm going to... Where am I going? Strawberry fields. And so we're made to feel a suspense and a waiting moment. But the thing that I wanted to point out about this is that if we listen to the melody itself, it doesn't necessarily reflect the shape or the delivery of the lyrical phrases. Let's just go through the intro again, because I love the way it transitions. This is our setup. So lovely, isn't it? And then we move into this. Even just that much, when you hear it on the harp, it kind of takes it out of the context of the Beatles, and you start to feel like this could come from, again, a Schubert or Brahms song. It's so elegant and polished. And so the phrases, da 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 dum, da 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 dum, da 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 dum, da 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 dum. It's flows on its own with its own grouping separate from the grouping, the pacing of the lyrics themselves. That's why I am separating the lyrical rhythm, or I could say the oratorical rhythm, and the melodic rhythm, even though both of them are so closely intertwined and one is the other in a way. But still, I'm making a distinction between them. That's another thing that I love about this. But exploring this a little bit further, nothing is real. Well, we started with, let me take you down, for I'm going to strawberry fields. It's so easily paced, gentle, flowing. And then suddenly, and nothing to get hung about. Suddenly there, hung about. That is where our oratorical rhythm changes. Hung about. Suddenly, instead of strawberry fields, nothing is real. And nothing to get hung about. It's all jumbled together, packed in there. Still, there's a delay, a spaced out delivery of the text, because it pauses there, but it's certainly clustered more tightly. Or perhaps a little bit later in the piece, no one, I think, is in my tree. Still kind of slow. Then it gets a bit quicker. I mean, it must be high or low. And then suddenly it picks up to such a rapid fire pace. That is, you can't, tune in, but it's all right. And then just as we're about to get lost, he puts on the brakes a little bit at the last minute. That is, I think it's not too bad. And so we have this slow opening, and then the oratorical element speeds up into these clustered bursts and then pulls back again. I feel like it's a bit like trying to walk on an icy surface, where you go slow and careful, try not to make any sudden movements, and then in spite of that, zip, our feet go shooting out from under us, and we have to scramble to keep our balance, get ourselves back in order. All of this is something that I find incredibly delightful to explore and think about and enjoy with the lyrical delivery itself. And as I start talking about this, I find myself thinking through the piece and thinking of more and more different examples, things that would be so much fun to unravel and explore. But in this context, I am refraining myself because this is not meant to launch a series about strawberry fields forever, which probably I could do if I were to go in with a little screwdriver and some scissors and start unraveling every little detail and talking, because you see, there's so much to explore about this piece. This is not an in-depth, and it's not a series on strawberry fields forever. This is about my playlist. And so I hope that these little things that are attracting me might spark your exploration of the piece some more as well. But let's continue on to the next and final chunk of interest that I have titled the melodic interest. It's so interesting for me to think about the fact that this melody was composed in reasonably close proximity to, say, something like I Am the Walrus. Because just think about how drastically different they are in shape and design. With I Am the Walrus, we have basically two notes, right? It's built on this sort of oscillating two-note motif. But this one, Strawberry Fields Forever, has such a beautiful, incredible shape, a feeling of rise and fall. Not just shape-wise, though, but momentum-wise, too. It feels a bit like, you could say, calligraphy. Sometimes we have this broad strokes and swooping lines that literally launch you into the next note. Let me take you down, for I'm going to strawberry fields. Other times, it's small, intricate, filigree type work. Misunderstanding all you see. And then, of course, something like the way in which it dampens the enthusiasm before we get to happy. Because, well, true to Lennon's character, he doesn't let us get too happy about anything. He He brings in this sort of emotional complexity. And even here, we find some incredibly rich moments of that. For example, this Strawberry Field, since I've been dwelling on this, let's just dwell on this a little bit more. Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to... Here, Strawberry Fields. Okay, what is this? Strawberry Fields. That's your F minor chord, right? But then we have the same thing coming up. Nothing is real. Did you hear how it darkened a bit? The lid came down, the clouds settled a bit lower over the landscape. We have, whoops, let's make sure that sounds clearly. And now here's the second. What happened? We went from C at the top to C flat at the top. And so it's the same shape. Strawberry fields. Nothing is real. Same shape, the same foundation. We land on the same F underneath. It's the same, even note names. A flat, B flat, C, F. The only difference is A flat, B flat, C flat to F. Just one note difference. But doesn't it do an incredible service to the music and the emotional implications? It feels like a sort of, maybe we could say, dampening of enthusiasm. Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to Strawberry Fields. Nothing is real. Or is it perhaps fading memory? If we go back to this idea of looking at an old image, we see the age showing on the picture. Or perhaps it's a trailing off in thought. Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to Strawberry Fields. And then we kind of lose our train of thought. Nothing is real. Or we shift our train of thought. And it brings in this gloominess, this subdued element to the music. And I find that so incredibly expressive. But it doesn't stop there. Because the next thing we have is this incredibly bright and nothing to get hung about, where we suddenly brighten to a G major rather than that minor and the diminished feeling. So my point is, this piece gives us an incredibly rich experience of the use of intervallic techniques for expressive and emotional impact. Now, let me break that down just a little bit because I don't want to get too musically, technically linguistic here. Intervallic techniques simply means using the distances between notes, how far we travel, to influence how we feel the emotions of the piece. Or I could even say differently, to create and shape the emotions found within the piece. Whether we feel them or not, they're there. And so this also is something that I love about this music. I'm looking over at the score here thinking, there's so much that I could dig into. We could do a whole video on this particular topic. Again, I'm going to refrain myself. I think I've given enough for you to sort of begin to understand why I am enjoying this piece so consistently over such a period of time, and why I expect to find this continuing on my playlist for probably forever, because it is that type of piece that just offers more and continues to give and give no matter where we find ourselves. Now, way back when I did my in-depth look at this piece, I talked a bit about how I saw this as fitting solidly within the classical music, impressionistic category, French Impressionism. I talked about that a bit. And each time I listen to it, I find myself returning to this idea. But I have to say that I don't feel it as romantic impressionism. More like a sort of impressionism bordering on neoclassicism. Again, here I find myself turning towards classical music technical terminology. Let's just say that instead of being all flowery and water and leaves and all of that impressionistic feeling, it feels a bit more like it's moving towards an abstract formalism, which we find in the neoclassical style. It has that kind of edge to it. Or we could say, again, I come back to this word sparseness and conservatism, a sort of disguised formalism, and yet without feeling like it is formal. Of course, with Ringo, irrepressibly lighting up the drums. And so I come around again to the fact that this has so many different things to offer. And none of them could be taken out and have it still be the same. We have to have that Ringo crashing in there. We have to have the piano ding, ding, ding later. We have to have this wonderful fade out and then surprise return at the outro. We have to have Lennon's cutting voice. We have to have this quavering mellotron. We have to have these cellos deep down, digging deeper and deeper and deeper. We have to have all of this. We have to have this incredible tonal palette, the oratorical rhythm of the lyrics, the beautifully calligraphic melody. And we have to have all of this and more. And I will be enjoying these elements for years to come. Because yes, it does have a solid place on my playlist. Now, you might be wondering, am I thinking about all of this every time I listen to this piece of music or any piece of music? Is this how my mind listens to music? And let me assure you, no, it is not. Meaning, I just let the music wash over me. I immerse myself in it. I let it take me where it will. And I find myself going places, different times, different ways, especially with a really great piece of music like Strawberry Fields Forever. But I am happy that I am able to then sit down and look at it and articulate the why of why it's there on my playlist. Why does it attract me? What are some of the things about it that make it to be a piece of music that I find personally enjoyable and engaging and powerful? And so this is my intent in this series. This is my first song on my playlist, and there is more coming. And each one I am going to try to express to you, to share with you. Maybe not everything, because as you see, music is so rich. We can't ever reduce it all to words. But I would like to be able to share with you the why of how it ended up on my playlist. Why do I feel it there? Why does it end up there? Why do I feel like it's such a great piece of music? Why is it so powerful in how it impacts me? Why do I find it pleasurable, rewarding, significant, meaningful, all those things? Or why do I just want to hear it? Because sometimes that's the case. I just want to hear it for whatever reason or none at all. And that is my goal. There will be more coming. Keep your eyes and ears open. I am looking forward to sharing these pieces of music with you from this perspective, and I'll see you soon.